And, okay, can everyone see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. So good evening, well, not good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk about what is the role of explicit and implicit learning in second language acquisition. So the book gives us the following definitions. The first one being towards explicit learning, that it says that is the input processing with a conscious intention to find out whether the input information contains regularities. And if it does find regularities, then it has to work out those concepts and rules in order for those regularities can be captured. And implicit learning, it says that is the input processing that is done unconsciously. So it's the complete opposite. It's done without any intention. So here I have a little comic, and I don't know if Jenny, can you help me read, please, the comic?
Sorry.
Jenny.
Jenny, if you could read the comic out loud, please.
Sure, I'm sorry, my microphone was unmuted.
It's okay.
I see you study, I'm so sorry. I see you studied in Spanish. How fluent are you? I can conjugate are, verbs in 10 tenses.
Okay, thank you so much, Jenny. So here we have a situation in which a person is being interviewed for, I guess, for a job. So the interviewer says, I can see you study Spanish. How fluent are you? And the interviewer responds, I can conjugate AR verbs in 10 tenses. So this is a traditional way, and it sort of gives us an example of how that person was taught Spanish, because they mainly use explicit learning. So here they focus mainly on grammar, on structure, which is more accuracy rather than fluency. So we cannot say that he is fluent just if he can dominate AR verbs. Okay, so the book also states that second language acquisition is largely implicit, and that is because it follows Krashen's hypothesis, which is a learning versus acquisition. So here we have the acquisition is implicit knowledge. It results in competence, because here the idea is that acquisition can lead to community competence. In other words, that language, has to be spontaneous, it has to be freely, it has to be fluent, as opposed to learning whereas more explicit knowledge and results in a learned system where it is available for monitoring. So here we're only monitoring accuracy rather than fluency. And also mentions Noam Chomsky Universal Grammar Framework, in which states that acquisition is implicit. We sort of learned about this yesterday, in which Janine and also Ben Patton mentioned that babies especially, and even we can learn the same way, that we have a hidden structure in our mind, in our head, in which we can internalize, for example, the head and the complement, how to unconsciously learn different languages. Doesn't matter if you're learning Spanish, English, French, and so forth. So also here it says, what about explicit learning? We cannot leave out explicit learning because it's also very important, but it's not fundamental, because we can use explicit learning maybe with adults, because we know that mainly adults, students, they want to learn, the grammar structure, they want to learn how a sentence is formulated. So we can teach them, but as Janine mentioned yesterday, First, we have to focus more on well-structured input activities, and then take just a couple of minutes to also get the students, for them to process their own conclusion or the correct formulation of that grammar structure. And here it says that second language acquisition, it involves both implicit and explicit learning. So here it states two theories in which both can be used, and the first one being skill theory, and this is where adults, they begin learning through largely first explicit process, and then with subsequent adequate practice and exposure, it moves into implicit process. So this is sort of the declarative and the procedural knowledge. So the declarative is obviously they're exposed to explicit knowledge, and then is internalized, and then it continues to the procedural knowledge, where Here, students have to sort of understand how it's used, like the action of what they were taught, of the input, in order for them to, with exposure and practice, they can actually acquire more language more naturally. And the second one is regarding noticing, and here's where the learners, they start noticing first the input. So and this is the process where it goes from input to intake. So they start paying attention to its form, to its use, and to its meaning. And then they continue to what it's in order to acquire the full spectrum of linguistic features. So this is also done first with a conscious awareness, and then it turns to unconsciously. To continue, we have the assessment of implicit and explicit learning. So we can conclude that second language acquisition has to be largely implicit by nature, that we have to focus, first of all, on fluency rather than accuracy. Also, explicit learning, like I stated, it is useful, it is important, but we have to not prioritize this or to mainly focus on this with our students, especially young learners. And we also have to pay attention to universal grammar because it operates outside of awareness and also has implicit learning that can be involved. So I'm going to share with you guys a video in which is sort of, it explains a little bit more of how universal grammar, how it works. Can everyone see the video? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Of how universal grammar works on children.
Given how many different languages there are, it might seem unlikely that there's one set of principles that can rule them all. But the idea comes to us from none less than the father of modern linguistics, Noam Chomsky. He called it universal grammar, or UG. There are a lot of arguments to back up the nativist position, but for today we're just going to focus on two of them. So the first is that babies go through the same stages in development no matter what language they're learning. The second is that infants master language way faster than they should if they're just little blank slate know-nothing babies. To be that fast, there's got to be something there to help them along. Let's start off with babbling, those adorable random syllables that little babies make. Except they're not really random. No matter what language they're learning, this early babbling uses the same set of sounds. One study examined the early babbling of babies from 15 different languages, including English, Thai, Japanese, Arabic, Hindi, and Mayan. Languages where all they have in common is that they're spoken by people. The study found that these babies all prefer labial consonants, or sounds made with the lips, more than other consonants. Stop consonants like P and B, where the airflow through the mouth is totally blocked, over others. And vowels made low in the mouth, like A and Ah, over those that are made higher up, like E and Oo. And all of that is independent of how often, or even whether at all, these languages make use of these sounds. Babbling Hindi learning babies make the same amounts of the same sounds that Arabic learning babies do. In fact, your average 8-month-old baby can differentiate between any pair of sounds used in any language in the world. Depending on your language, you might not be able to tell the difference between talk and talk, or between lock and rock, but your baby can. It makes—
Okay, now we're going to continue, because it's a really long video, so we're going to watch parts of it.
Child gets this right. That strongly suggests that there's something very special going on with language. But it's not just that all babies do the same things that make us think that language is innate, that it's something we're born with. It's that kids get so good at language so quickly. Let's consider what your average 2.5-year-old knows about language. They know what sound combinations are possible for their language, so they know what a possible word sounds like. They know the word order for their language. So a Turkish kid will know that a verb comes after the object, but a French kid will know that it's the other way around. They know how to make questions, and what sorts of questions it's grammatically okay to ask. They know how to use modifiers like adjectives and adverbs. Now, think about what your average toddler knows about, like, everything else. They know a whole lot about how language works at an age where they can't add 2 + 2, or tie their shoes, or reliably use a bathroom. So why are kids so good? Why can they learn so fast, make so few mistakes, and succeed where sophisticated computer models fail? How do they know all of this without having it explicitly taught to them? It's because they already know how language can work. Deep in their brains, in their genes, babies have the abstract rule sets that tell them what's possible and what's not. All babies start the same way with the same linguistic abilities. Then they apply the data they hear to the universal grammar in their heads, and they make little linguistic miracles happen every single day. So we've reached the
Okay, so that was sort of the idea of what universal grammar consists of in children. And now my question is, do you think that implicit learning induces critical thinking? If so, how?
Okay, do you guys understand now the difference between implicit and explicit learning? You all understand that? So.
I don't think so at all, because I think it helps somehow to clarify some things, but I don't think it affects critical thinking or develops it, because you need actually the other teaching that, not explicit, implicit.
Okay, let's go back to the question that I just asked to make sure that we understand the basis. Right, so do you all understand the difference between implicit and explicit learning? Some of you said so. Who thinks they can explain it in their own words?
I think that explicit learning is when you teach the rules and the structures, and implicit is when students have to analyze sentences in order to learn the structures or understand how the language works.
Isolina, would you say that's accurate?
Well, implicit is regarding acquisition, like we were learning yesterday, you know, how they unconsciously are learning the language, how they are processing. And explicit is regarding how we usually teach, you know, the traditional way where we focus mainly on grammar, and vocabulary, so students can then memorize that information and try to produce.
Right, that's the general idea. So explicit, why it's called explicit is because we're explicitly teaching them explicit grammar rules, formulas, you know, paradigms, things like that, right? And implicit instruction is not that we're not teaching grammar, we're just teaching it in an implicit way. What do we mean by implicit? That the students figure out the grammar and how it works through a process of induction. Induction, meaning that they collect all of this input data that they have, right? The good input that you gave them, like the input activities I showed you guys yesterday. And from that, they can generate the rule themselves. They understand how it works, but it's more implicit. Yes, this is the way that we have learned is more conducive to acquisition, that helps students acquire the language better. When they're actually seeing the structure in use, hearing it in use to communicate real messages, then instead, like the explicit instruction is not helpful, at least not as a main base for instruction, right? Okay, so that having been said, we can go back to Isolina's question.
Okay, so the question was, do you think that implicit learning induces critical thinking? If so, how?
Yeah, I would say yes, because as Janine mentioned, it is a matter of an inductive analysis. So if we are figuring out what the rule is by hearing it or by being exposed to, so maybe yes, we are doing that with our critical thinking skills as well. So I would say yes.
And of course, we have to contribute as teachers by using processing instruction. Remember what we saw yesterday? That we have to help them through their input. How do we do that? We highlight the target structure so that they pay more attention to it, right? So that they're aware this is something that you should be focusing on, right? So these things are important. Those are things that we need to set up so that we know that they're actually paying attention to the things that we want them to pay attention to, right? And we also need to create structured input activities to see if they're actually processing the meaning of the language. Because just structure does not help for acquisition. Remember, we said yesterday there needs to be a process called binding. Binding is connecting two things. Do you guys remember what it was?
Meaning and form.
Exactly. When we connect form with meaning, right? When we not only see the structure, but we also process the meaning of that structure in context. That's absolutely necessary for acquisition. If we don't make our students do that and we only focus on structure, then we will not have acquisition. We can't. It won't happen. Okay? Okay. Any other comments on explicit versus implicit teaching and learning? So the goal then for you guys, the real life application of this is like I told you yesterday. You give them a whole bunch of rich input, compelling, optimal input, as Dr. Krashen would say. And at the end of the input section of your class, if it's 1 class period, 3 class periods, whatever, you ask the students what they noticed. Ask the students what's happening in the language, and they will be able to tell you. And not only is this good for their acquisition, but it's also good for their self-esteem, because then they feel like they've discovered the rule of English instead of their teachers just giving them the rule. So they feel empowered, which is precisely what we want, for them to have more self-confidence and a lower effective filter. You see how this all goes together, right? So that's the goal. Yeah, good.
Yeah, Janine.
Yes,
Yeah,
Marcelo.
I would like to say that this kind of this is not a fast process. On the contrary, I think it's a long process. So we as teachers, probably we are aware that from now and tomorrow, the students are going to be, thinking in English, but no, I think it's a long process. And if we continue grade by grade, with the same kind of process, so we are going to have results. Yeah, as you mentioned yesterday, yeah, today we are working with a different material, the modules. And well, in this moment, we don't have results now, but if we continue with these kind of ideas that we are getting now, so probably in the coming years, we are going to have results. So I'd like to mention only that.
That's exactly right. Yes, the modules, those of you in the public school system, this is a long-term goal, right? The ones who are starting in segundo de básica with the modules will be able to reach tercero de bachillerato and have a debate about public versus private education in English, as long as their teachers do a good job, right? Because their teachers need to be a good support system for these modules to work. Without the teacher support, it doesn't matter about the material. Yeah, so in theory, yes, they should be able to reach this goal, but it's a long-term goal. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not miracle. It's not a miracle solution, but we're going in the right direction. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Isolina, thank you. Last but not least, Miguel, please.
Oh, hello everyone. Okay, thanks. Let's start. I have all the information here. It's basically concepts. I also found a video which is going to help us understand it a little bit better. And okay, here we go. Okay, let me share the screen. Please, you guys confirm if you can see it.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So basically, what are the roles of input and output in second language acquisition? Okay, now, based on this, let me start with input. I'm going to start with input. Okay, just a minute, here we go. Basically, input is considered the major data source that we can give learners, that we can learners can have. Okay, it is important to give them lots of input for the student, to the learners, but basically they should have examples of the target language we want them to learn. That's the objective. Okay, that's why we need to choose them wisely. Okay, the objective in this case is that ideally the learners should go about the grammar, they should go about the examples, they should construct the grammar structures in their heads. That's important. That's the point here. Not give them explicitly, but they should go about constructing the grammar on the examples that we give them. So we have to give them a lot of input, but also the target language should be implicit in it. Okay. Now, something that we heard about grammar, universal grammar is important. Universal grammar doesn't deny the input's key role. It is important to have good inputs, good input for them, but also the learners should have some kind of innate principles to acquire the language. Okay, both are necessary. Since babies, we assimilate the language, and those abilities that we have since the beginning help us understand the objective of the language that we are learning, right? So in second language acquisition, it is going to take place. It's going to happen if these two are present. The innate principles from learners, and also the input. Both are important in this case. Now, on the other hand, we have the connectionist perspective, which explains that the learner is like a computer that should process the linguistic information. They should be inductive, as we just heard. Okay, that's what's necessary here. We need to remember that this perspective explains that the learner should have some kind of, it should be inductive in it every time it's learning the language. After this process and after a lot of input, they can see some grammar, okay? But as we heard before, not to give them explicit in an explicit way. It should be implicit after a lot of exercise in it. That's what we need to remember. That's why I think it's necessary to highlight this part. Okay, now, from this perspective, please let me read this part. From this perspective, input is more important as there are no specific rules or mechanisms that contain the pre-existing linguistic information. Okay, that's what universal grammar states. Now, according to the book, I found this quote that I think it's very important, which says that, as with other statistical estimations, a large and representative sample of language. Let's remember this. It's important to give them large quantities, but also representative. Representative meaning the input should have the target language that we need them to assimilate. Okay, so a large and representative sample of language is required for the learner to abstract a rational model that is a good fit with the language data. Okay, so basically in second language acquisition, it is crucial to give them input. Input is a central construct in second language acquisition. Okay, now output. According to Ms. Swain, that we saw that she, let me remember, this one, I think it was in the 80s. I'm sure Janine can correct if I'm wrong. This in the middle 80s. In the middle 80s, Meryl Swain, she launched her famous comprehensive output hypothesis. That's what she said, but we are going to see that throughout time, she changed it a little bit, okay? She said that it is a necessary mechanism for acquisition, independent of comprehensive input. She said that output is very important, it's a necessary mechanism, okay? Now, there are three positions related to output. First one, output is necessary. Second, output, it is not necessary. And third, output is beneficial. The first one, according to Dr. Krashen, that we know that is like the god of the language acquisition. According to him, he kind of debunked the first one in the 80s. He said that there is no, and actually it is true, because there is no research, there is no necessary or proof research that actually asserts that output is necessary. There is no research that proves that, okay? So we're going to leave the first one, forget it. We're going to focus on if it's not necessary or if it's beneficial, okay? Now, so based on the last two, we may say that it may not be necessary, but interaction with other speakers is useful, okay? Now, what's important? In order to go from output not being necessary to being beneficial, we need to remember that it is not the same when you communicate with native speakers or non-native speakers, okay? So in this case, this part is crucial. Modified interactions between non-speakers and non-native speakers. Okay, when a native speaker communicates with a non-native speaker, the native speaker's output becomes the non-native speaker's input. Okay, so it's going to affect the non-native speaker's perception in output. That's what Long says in 1981. And he focuses more on second language acquisition, not native speakers among native speakers, but from speakers from other countries. Okay, let me rephrase this part. Let me repeat this part. It's very important. If we put together a non-native speaker and a native speaker, the native speaker is going to, the native speaker's output is going to play a key role in the interaction. The non-native speaker is going to receive the language. And according to some studies, it is proved that there are some modifications when a native speaker modifies his speech when he's talking with a non-native speakers. Okay, so in this case, this is called the interaction hypothesis, and this is when it goes to the last part. It's going to assert if it's beneficial or not for non-native speakers. Okay. So the role of interaction in this case states that the native speaker's output may produce some sort of feedback to learners. Okay, so when a non-native speaker talks to a native speaker, his input is going to help me to understand the language better. Okay, so when I understand this language better, it may become feedback for me. Okay, it's going to be my feedback. It's going to check, am I speaking well? Can I modify this? Does this native speaker understand me or not? It may help because it can help me scan more input and fix the problems that I have in my speech. Okay. But now it is also important to analyze this because it can be, as Swain said after in the 1980s, he says that I have hypothesized that under certain conditions, output promotes noticing. Okay, now it's changed that from a key role to maybe it can promote noticing, it can be beneficial. That's the change that she made. Okay, and it also may produce meta talk. I don't know if someone has heard about this, meta talk.
No.
Nobody? No? Actually, I didn't. But as far as I read the book, when I read the book, it says that meta talk is learning. Is what learners do. Learners talking out loud about the language itself. That's meta talk. Okay. And well, one of the last ideas is that Swain has modified her speech and output. As I said, going from it plays a key role, it is as important as input, to, well, it may represent, it may enhance particular aspects of acquisition. It should be important to analyze it too. Okay, well, in order to understand this one, I'm going to show you a video which is going to help us with the concept of each one, input and output, and also a few other components that we should take into account to understand these two. Okay, this is the first one. I'm sure you can see the video, right? You're seeing the video. I can share it with you later, but let's analyze only a few parts of it. Okay, here we go.
Exposure to the target language that is around us. Or to put it another way, input can be defined as the language data which the learner is exposed to, i.e., listening and reading. It is important to second language development because without it, there can be no output. In short, this means if you don't hear or see the language, then you can't learn the language. To prove this, I want you to try this very simple experiment. Think of a language you have never heard or seen.
Okay, for example, can you sing later because we don't have enough time. So that's what he said about input. Okay. Now let's check the other part. I think these are the most important parts you should remember in input. What goes in, it has to be comprehensible. Okay. You need to pay attention to it. As Krashen said, it has to be compelling for learners, and we should make the difference between input and intake. Okay, intake is what the students actually assimilate. Good. So in the video, you can see it's 1, 2, 3, like 4 components. Now, let's go to the output.
Look at output. If input is what goes in, then output is what comes out, i.e. speaking and writing. And why is output so important? Well, there are
These are the important, also the other important components in output. Okay, let me share the video. You want to watch it later, the whole thing, because it's just a bit long. And basically, that's what I wanted to show you about my topic. Now, this is the question that I think we should all ask ourselves. Okay, based on the ideas that we've heard today, which would be more essential to focus on in your class? Which would be more essential to focus on? Okay, not to assess or no, to focus on. That's my question. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Miguel.
Okay, so let me modify Miguel's question just a little bit. How many of you, by a show of hands, how many of you have decided you're going to change your focus in class?
Exactly.
Woohoo! That's good. That's good. Good job, guys. The first step is admitting that you have a problem. No, the first step is recognizing that we're doing something wrong. And all of us, I think, or 99% of us, unless you're Dr. Krashen or Dr. Van Patten, went through a phase where we're like, oh crap, I'm not doing this right. Yeah. And that's the first thing, is to be able to recognize that maybe we're not doing things the right way and that there's a better way. Right? Not because, one person says it, not because it's, you're noveleros or anything like that. No, but because there's scientific research for 40 years that tells us this. Yeah. And it does require a little bit more work on your parts as teachers. I'm not going to lie. It's a little bit more work because you have to be a little more creative. But once you start creating these input activities, you're going to create your first one today, right? Once you start creating these input activities and you get the hang of how they work, you can start building a bank, and then you have them for the future, right? So the first year is going to take you a little extra work. Yes, this is true, and take a lot of creativity. And maybe you're going to think of an activity as you're lying in bed at night and ready to start falling asleep. And then you're like, oh, I know what I can do, for modal verbs. Using an input activity. Jot it down, have a piece of paper by you, write it down, and then the next day develop the activity, right? But the results of doing this are going to be so worth it that maybe we have a chance of getting out of last place in English in Latin America. Maybe we have that chance if you guys do your part. Yeah, okay. Did anyone have any questions or comments about Miguel's topic or presentation? So we're all pretty much clear. Yeah. So it's very hotly debated, the role of output. It's like we usually push our students to produce really fast and they're not ready for it yet. And that stresses them out, right? So we have to allow them to go through what native speakers go through, which is the silent period. Yes, Miguel.
Yeah, actually, I have a question based on what I did.
Okay.
The thing is that later I found something like it says other perspectives. It says that there is another perspective based on skill acquisition. It refers to the ability to actually use the language. So we've heard until now that, of course, input is really important. It's essential in this case. But how important should it be output? We actually need to see students can produce the language to actually assess them. That's what authorities ask from us, right? To assign a grade, to set a standard, to let them pass or not. So, and especially with so enormous classes that we have, so many students.
Yeah, that's a whole other issue that is horrible and very difficult to deal with, the class sizes. That's That's a whole like un asunto aparte, right? But as far as what you're asking about skill acquisition, remember when we saw 5 givens about SLA, and we saw that it was dynamic but slow, and we saw that it has a lot of processes and all that stuff. One of the points that we saw is that skill acquisition is different from the creation of an implicit linguistic system, right? So if we want our students to be able to speak and write in English, first, we have to give them the tools to be able to do that. And the tools are what they develop in their implicit system in their brains, right? So when we create structured input activities, what we're doing is developing their implicit system. We're not necessarily practicing a skill. And this is very important also when it comes to the modules, because the modules, there are a lot of reading pages in the modules. But those pages are not to develop the skill of reading. Those pages are provided as input to help create their implicit system, right? So we can't see those pages as developing a reading skill, because developing the skills in English is separate from developing their implicit system. So what I would suggest is first focus on developing their implicit system, because if we want them to be able to do those things like speak and write in English, they need to have stuff up here that they can use to be able to put out of here and out of here, right? If they don't have stuff up here in their implicit system, how do we expect them to produce anything meaningful in either of the 2 productive skills, speaking or writing, right? So focus on developing their implicit system, focus on getting real language into their brains, natural language, and then when they have that, then we can kind of ask them to produce more. I'm going to show you a part of the video with Dr. Krashen where I asked him the question, because one of my colleagues in the master's program, Adeline, who I think you guys have next semester, you're going to like her a lot. She's a really nice girl, paisana. She's a paisana. She works with Ecuador Habla Inglés with the US Embassy. Yeah, she's a really good teacher. Anyways, she asked a question about what is, according to Dr. Krashen, the role of output. And I'll play that part of the video for you guys so you can see what he says. Yeah, I don't know if I agree with him 110% on this one. I usually agree with him 110%. On this particular point, I might agree with him 99%, you know, but, but it makes sense actually, what he says. So I'll let you listen to what he has to say about output. The fact of the matter is we are forcing our students to produce language way too quickly. We don't give them a chance to develop their implicit system, and we say, go ahead, produce. So they rely on a formula to produce, but that's not real language production. That's not real. That's fake. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very forced and very constructed, and it's just not, it's not what we want them to produce. So if you have the opportunity to play with your syllabus a little bit within your liberty, right? Focus first on input. Like I said, if you have a week to teach them a grammar structure and you have 5 hours during that week, you have 5 classes, 5 hours, spend 3 of those hours on input first. Start building something up here. Not just a formula, but building it, building real language, and then start to ask them to produce a little bit, but not before. Okay.
Janine, what you have mentioned, it is so interesting. And now I have the clear path that I have to do from now. But there is the other side. When the authorities made us, or made us to grade all the time, they are asking us, or I don't know if it is the same in the other high schools, but in my high school, what I can tell you is that we are it's like forced to get an assessment. We have to grade the students every single week. We have claimed a lot, and now we get it that at least in 2 weeks we are going to get a grade. So I don't know if it match what the authorities are asking us to do, and with this reality, because they don't know, as you have mentioned before, they don't know how to teach a language, or how important is that they acquire the language in this way. So I don't know, this just, I was thinking it.
And this is the constant struggle, Jenny. This is exactly what we've been talking about also the whole course, right? How do we deal with authorities who are, and I'm not using this term to be insulting, but who are ignorant. They're ignorant. Just like I'm ignorant about psychology. I don't know how to be a psychologist to someone. I'm ignorant. Like it's not an insult, it's reality. I don't know about those things, so I'm ignorant. We all ignore certain things. We're all ignorant into certain things. Authorities are ignorant to language teaching. So what is the alternative? Educate them. That's all I can say. Like, that's all we can start to try to do, right? You have to try to fight against the authorities. What I've noticed in a lot of situations in living in Ecuador for 9 years is that a lot of times professionals, even professionals like yourselves, are used to following the rules, are used to just saying, okay, well, I have to do this. And especially in the public school system, because everybody has written to me, well, can you give me the microplan and the PCA and the PUD, and can you please give me this and give me this and give me this? I'm like, do it, just do it. You know, you're a professional, you could do it. You know, or like a teacher who says, can you please give me the guidelines on how to teach a student with, you know, this particular special need? Go look for it. You can do this. You know, you're autonomous, right? So in that same vein, I think it's really important for you guys to empower yourselves as professionals. Why the heck do people who don't know about language teaching have to be the ones telling you about how to teach languages? Why can't you be the ones making those decisions? Why can't you reverse the system? I know it's hard. I know it's utopic in reality, but why don't we start somewhere? Why don't we start somewhere by educating people? You know, get a reunión diaria together. Yeah, educate the people. Be like, guys, guess what? You know, I've been learning this stuff and makes total sense. Why don't we try this? You know, why don't we try this year? I have a cool idea for us. You know, start educating people. There's a start. I know it's not easy, Jenny. Like, you can't just like all of a sudden say, nope, I'm an English teacher, I know what I'm doing. But if you keep your mouth shut and you just allow the authorities to rule you on something that you know how to do better than anybody at your school, then you've already lost. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Ya perdiste if you don't even try to say, hey, let me tell you something about how we teach English, right? Let me tell you something about how English is different from any other subject. Because we're dealing with acquisition. No other subjects are dealing with acquisition. They're all working in their native language to teach different things, right? But you guys are working with acquisition. So it's a completely different mental process. And I think if we start trying to educate people, we might start going in a better direction. Maybe.
Okay, Janine, I think that there are a lot of things that we have to relearn before starting this kind of this program. I used to talk with my colleagues about acquisition, and my colleagues used to say that acquisition can be real here in Ecuador. Yeah, because we are not surrounded by English. And no, now we understand that it's not the fact of being surrounded by English, it's the fact of being of giving a good input activity inside the class and try to they be surrounded by English, at least at home, watching videos, listening to music, etc. So now I think with this idea, I am very clear that we are going to make a change. Mm-hmm.
Right, that's great. Yeah, and again, homework, you want to send them homework, send them English, send them input, send them real life stuff, send them cool things, give them freedom. If they're in bachillerato, be like, okay, guys, guess what? This week, you can do whatever you want for homework. They'd be like, what, teacher, what? Okay, anything that's in English, anything. Okay, and then on Monday, in Monday's class, y'all are gonna have 30 seconds, each one of you, to tell us what you did. Okay? and show a couple pictures, screenshots or something, so that we have proof that they actually did it, because they could just be like, oh, I watched a movie, like a movie that they already watched in Spanish and they didn't actually do it in English. But you can ask for some proof, right? Some screenshots or something. Yeah, and say all of you have 30 seconds, just 30 seconds to talk about what you did. Why did you choose that activity? What did you like? What was it about? You know, something like that. Give them freedom, because if they have freedom and they get to do something they already like doing, but they do it in English, not only is the input going to be absorbed better, you're going to lower their affective filter. They're going to start liking the class better. And then you're going to get further with them because they have better attitudes. See how this is all connected? There's a method to the madness, as they say. Yeah. All right. Let's continue. All right, so that's it for the presentations, guys. Please do not forget to upload your presentations to the platform where it says student PowerPoint presentations, right? Because I have to give you all a grade for those. Everybody did fine, no problems whatsoever, but I need to give you guys a grade. Okay, so make sure that you upload your presentations there. It's a forum, so that means you can all see each other's contributions, right? So you can have that material for yourselves as well. Okay, speaking of Dr. Krashen, I think I'm gonna go with him right now. Let's listen to, we left off at minute 33. So let's continue where we left off, so we can continue to listen to what he has to say. Sometimes he, like you've seen, he gets very anecdotal and he tells like long stories. So I might skip certain parts, but guys, be active in the chat. If you want to comment on something, if something he says generates a question in your head, comment on it in the chat. I might stop the video at some points. Obviously I'll stop so we can take a break. Yeah, but let's continue listening to him.
Spanish restaurants from Spain in Southern California. His Spanish is excellent. I went to a workshop, a webinar. I listened to it on the computer on my favorite topic, Steve Krashen's theory of language acquisition, presented in French by a French professor from Montreal. And it was a very good lecture. Steve was in the audience. He raised his hand, made wonderful comments in beautiful, beautiful French. He and I went to dinner with Chinese teachers when we were at the ACTFul meeting once, with my Chinese teachers, as a matter of fact, and they were just overwhelmed how beautifully he spoke Mandarin. So he's the real thing. So I take his advice very, very seriously. Language acquisition, though, has to, in order for it to work, it has to be compelling. That means language classes should be pleasant. They should be interesting. That's why I like these books, Adriano Ramirez and Bill Van Patten, because they're good literature. You have to force yourself. And their books are so good that you're no longer aware you're doing another language. I spoke about Bill. Let me put in a good word for Adriana Ramirez and what she does with these. She wrote one book, the first one I read that she did. I went up to, I didn't go there. I gave a web.
Hold on.
He says, oh, that's just the way we are. On Monday in our English class, and we expect the students to practice it and master it by Friday. No. Research says it's a little at a time. First class research from the University of Illinois, originally in English as a first language, Richard Anderson and his really interesting team. I've never met this guy, but boy, his work is good. They find when you see a new word in context and you kind of understand it, you get a little bit, maybe 5–10% of the meaning of the word. And each time you see it, it gets a little better, a little better. It's the context that helps you. And the research also says that most contexts are, as a matter of fact, helpful, 60–70%. Some don't help you one way or another. A very small minority lead you in the wrong direction. We have replicated his work in second language acquisition. This means it could take a long time till you acquire the new vocabulary, till you acquire the new grammar. Let's talk about application. The best way of making sure input is not just comprehensible, but interesting is to use stories, fiction. I have become deeply interested in fiction. I never thought much about fiction because I'm a big shot university professor and I'm not going to lower myself to fiction story, but oh my, was I wrong. It's absolutely great. I'll tell you how it first happened. I live about 40 minutes from Los Angeles. I live in the suburbs a little bit. And to get to the city, as we call it, Santa Monica, I have to drive something called Pacific Coast Highway. It takes me about 40 minutes. Before the coronavirus, I went there twice a week for two important reasons. Number one, my nietos live in Santa Monica. So, okay, I had to go see them because I'm addicted to my nietos. Also, Gold's Gym. You can tell I'm weightlifter, right? Okay. I have to go there and I run into Arnold every so often. Arnold Schwarzenegger turns out is a really nice guy. Okay, that's another story. He doesn't understand much about language, but that's something else. He's done very well. You have to stop at the supermarket. You wait in the car I'd forgotten about, which was weird because it was a dissertation and I was on the committee. It was written by Victoria Fiction. You look and see what books people take out of the library. It's mostly fiction. And you
Okay, so here to summarize for the sake of time, he talks a lot about the importance of reading. He's had a lot of articles published recently on the importance of reading, and in which he states that reading is the number one thing that leads to acquisition. Yeah, and we're not doing enough reading, obviously. I'm going to send you, maybe during the break, I'll pull up the websites to international libraries where they have graded readers that you guys can use to read with your students. Now, simple language, you can choose the level, choose the age, all that stuff. And you guys have these free books like that you can access on the internet, and that will also help with their acquisition, both of vocabulary and of grammar. So that's what he talks about here.
You get to know the narrator pretty well. And
I'm just going to skip some of this.
Speller in chief. We elected a commander in chief.
Oh, here
big deal. He should get a proofreader. Who cares?
He talks about
I wrote a letter to the editor, which I will send you guys. And I said, spelling is a serious problem.
Yeah, we're just going to skip this part.
Beginning language teaching methods, the ones that are really hot now, the beginning method is always stories. There's good reason for this. That's what gets kids involved. In first language, the literature on storytelling, very interesting. One of my favorite books is the Read Aloud Handbook by june30. Oh, I've got to tell you about my mother and her relationship to june30. Mom, who has been just amazing. It works beautifully. The key in her storytelling technique. Let me give you a couple of research studies that back this up, the whole reading hypothesis. And then I'll come to a stunning conclusion, which will please you, I hope, and make our lives a little easier. This first study is a study we did. Dr. Mason, when she was teaching at the university in Southern California, in Japan, would do stories and then get kids onto books. When the semester was over, some of the students met with her and asked her, could you stay with us? Could we meet with you occasionally and give us some advice on books to read, etc.? And she said, sure, I'll be happy to if you help me. She said, I would like you to keep a record of the books you read, just a record, and every so often take a standardized test. She had them take the TOEIC test. She paid for it, doesn't take long. It's a pretty good test, listening, comprehension, and reading. This lasted for 2 years. Here are the results. The more they read, the more vocabulary they acquired. And in our statistical analysis, amount of reading was the only predictor. It didn't matter if they studied on their own, if they took other classes. We used statistical techniques to see if those counted. No, it was the reading that counted. Also, the TOEIC test is from 0 to 1,000. If you reach 250, it's enough to start reading easy texts. You reach 700, 800, you're into academic language. You're pretty good. Here's what she found. For every hour they read, they gained more than a half a point on the TOEIC. Little bit of variation, not all that much. They read different things. So they actually gained 0.6 of a point. You read for 100 hours, you'll gain 600 points on the TOEIC. That means in a year, if you're dedicated in a year, you can go from, as we say in speed limit 0 to 60, you can go from low levels to fairly high levels in 1 year, 2 years. My colleague, Jeff McQuillan, calls this the Starbucks method, okay? He actually wrote an article called the Starbucks method. Says you want to have good high scores and get vocabulary, go to Starbucks. Used to be able to do that before the virus. Have a coffee, sit down and read for pleasure, and you will grow. Read what you want to read. What we have found also, if people select their own reading, they automatically start reading more sophisticated things. The grammar gets harder, the vocabulary gets harder, and it just happens. They don't stay with super easy stuff because it's boring. They're going for interest. More evidence for this hypothesis. I never get tired of presenting this, so you're in for it. A study done at the University of London. This is with first language, okay? There's a group of scientists at the University of London that has been studying the same group of people for over 40 years. They started when they were very tiny babies or 2-3 years old, and they've been giving them different tests, not for a long time, but every 2 or 3 years for a few hours. Here's what they have found. They gave them lists too. One year they gave them a vocabulary test. This is when the subjects were 42 years old. They gave them a test of English vocabulary, and they asked them about their reading habits. Reading was, of course, a wonderful predictor of vocabulary size. Fiction was a better predictor than nonfiction. Stories, wow. This is remarkable and exciting in my opinion, okay? Amazing. Other things they found about this. We also know the other advantages of fiction, but fiction also gives you what we call academic vocabulary. There are all these studies based on lists that scholars have made of lists of academic words. Here's what Jeff McQuillan, my former student, Jeff reminds me of Star Wars, when Obi-Wan Kenobi meets Darth Vader, and they have this exchange. It says, I was once the master, and you were the student. Now you were the student, I'm the master, blah, blah. That's how it's happened with Jeff. I was the master, he was the student. He is now the master, I am the student. He's done these wonderful studies. The first one, he assembled lots of books that kids like to read. Judy Blume, okay? Hogwarts series, okay? He examined the vocabulary in those books. You read those books, you're exposed to at least half of the academic vocabulary you need to succeed in school by reading 7 Harry Potter books. Another scholar did a study of science fiction. You do a year of science fiction reading, you get about half of the scientific vocabulary and enough exposures to them that are on the lists of important scientific words you should learn. So this stuff really does work. Now I want to point out a problem with this and how we can solve it. In Japan, where Dr. Mason worked at a university, she helped put together a library of graded readers. How many books in English for her English students? Graded readers? 5,000. This is what you need so they can select things on their own. Our problem in the United States, we now are telling people about our research. Our students in bilingual and heritage programs don't have anything to read. There's no, even in Spanish, which is the most popular second language, there's bilingual programs, Spanish, English, and they're quite successful, but there isn't a lot to read in Spanish. Sandra Pucci, my former student, be true to your school, as research library.
Okay, he just talks about the lack of resources.
This stuff is sometimes very challenging. And there's no excuse for it because there's some great writers. Read Rumi. They got interested in reading on their own. Perry, Dr. McQuillan.
Okay, I'm skipping some of this because he basically says the same thing, basically saying that, you know, reading is fundamental. We're not doing enough of it, but we're not supposed to be reading for reading's sake, not to develop the skill of reading, but to acquire more language through more rich input and give students the opportunity to choose, for them to decide. Here's a bunch of books. You guys pick which one you want to read. Yeah, that also helps a lot because we don't want to pick boring topics, remember? Okay, I think let's see. I don't remember what we were talking about here. Hold on. I remember my mother saying, pronounce it like Chicago, because they were conscious of the stigma that went along with pronouncing it as Chicago. And so it was interesting. My mom's a teacher, my dad's a musician. So I just wanted to mention that point to you.
I've always liked your parents. That's cool.
All right. We have a couple of questions here that are general questions that are kind of reappearing. So the first one is, in Ecuador, I think we're in a process of moving over to more natural approaches, let's say, right? More communicative ways of teaching and things like that. But there's still the question of the role of explicit grammar instruction in classes when they have only 3 hours per week. What teachers are asking, I work a lot with the public school teachers in the public school system, and they're trying to improve their ways. They're working really hard. What can they do? What suggestions can you offer to them to get away from that explicit grammar instruction, especially when they only have 3 hours a week and they have to comply with certain guidelines?
Well, we've got to change the guidelines. And if not us, who?
That's right. I agree.
¿Qué les dije?
If
Now
not
Dr.
now,
Krashen said it.
when? That's a little Jewish philosophy from Ethics of the Fathers. We have got to do this. And that means we have to communicate with the public, which I try. Yes, I have 500 plus publications. I also have several thousand letters to the editor. Some got published, most of them didn't, but you keep trying. And I like sharing things on Twitter. I like sharing things with my colleagues as much as I can, because I can't write to everybody, etc. I'll tell you what goes on with letters to the editor. I once wrote a letter to the editor, didn't get published. One of my colleagues said, well, I was going to send one in too, but you can ask grammar questions 10 minutes. So I talked to Janine about it. And I said, how many questions do you get? Oh, about 2 or 3. 2 or 3 a period? No, 2 or 3 every semester. Nobody cares.
Okay, sorry, I skipped a little bit too far, but he said basically like, okay, teaching with communicatively through input and everything like that, how many questions do you actually get about grammar? And he said in this particular situation, very few questions, because nobody cares, because everybody already has it all through their input. You see?
Only this gradually fading belief that grammar is a virtue. And then Janina set it up so people could come to office hours. Very few people ever showed up. Older people, if you want to make a point about grammar, fine, here and there, something interesting. 1 or 2 of the kids will find it interesting. That's about all. It's also, there's a couple of reasons though that a little bit of grammar teaching is a good idea for older people. It can be used for editing. So when I write something, for example, I sometimes have to look up spelling. If I'm writing something in Spanish, which is not very often, I have to make sure I got the right set of stata right. You have to make sure the agreement is there. And I occasionally have to look it up. So editing, that's okay. But if you're writing in a second language, you know this is a good idea. And that's why we have spell check and grammar check, etc. And a little knowledge of grammar, but you have more than enough knowledge of grammar, which you got in your native language arts class already. So I would not say it's bad, don't ever use it. But it's okay. There's another reason, 2 other reasons for teaching grammar. One is it's linguistics. That's subject matter, which I find fascinating. Chomsky's amazing idea that languages have universals. And if something is universal, it's innate. Wow. So when you're teaching a little bit about language, you show something's universal, it's here in Spanish, it's here in English, etc. It's here in Quechua, we got it. That's interesting. but it's general education. It's not language teaching. Now, in order to answer the next part of this, I have to pretend that you asked me about accent. If that's okay with you.
It's
I'm
fine.
going to talk about accent.
Go right ahead. What am I supposed to tell him? Excuse me, no, you can't talk about that. So he's going to talk about accents. Maybe this is something we haven't really talked about. And his research is now focused also on accents. And he says, you'll see, he says the perfect accent is within you. Yeah, so I don't know if you guys will agree with what he says, but how to kind of reduce a foreign accent, he talks about that right now.
I have looked at the complete literature on accent improvement. Doesn't work. It's like grammar improvement. The conditions have to be met. It's very tough to make any gains in grammar. You have to be thinking about the pronunciation, do it like this, put your tongue over here. It's like conscious monitoring all the time. And I've looked at the research. The ads say, wonderful, take our classes, make a fortune on giving people English grammar. I remember once I got an invitation from a very wealthy, famous business person. So wealthy and famous, I've totally forgotten his name, but he was very well known. And he invited me to his house, this mansion in the Hollywood Hills. He was from Austria and he had a slight German accent and he wanted to get rid of it. So he was told, of course, to contact Professor Krashen, who's this world-renowned authority. Now, so I went over to his house, served me coffee. It was very pleasant. And I told him my view. He thought it was utter nonsense. I was going to say bullshit, but I can't do that. Okay. It was utter nonsense. Okay. I said, what if I told you that I have a machine that when you speak English, it'll give you the wave of the sound and we can match it to native English speakers. You can practice. He said, that would be terrific. It's not going to work. So the public thinks it's not done this way. I think it is. Let me tell you why I think what I do about accent. I think accent is acquired and it's acquired immediately and very well after a few hundred hours. The perfect accent is inside you. And I'll tell you one of my favorite stories. This was told to me when I was teaching in the Peace Corps in the 1960s. I was in Ethiopia, had a good time. And I met a guy there, a British guy from London named Gerald Mosbeck. And he was a teacher, etc. And he told me the story when he was in secondary school and high school in England. He studied French as all of the teenage kids did, and he hated it. I can see why, grammar, etc. The final examination was an oral conversation, just him in front of the experimenters. Can you imagine putting a teenage kid in front of people and making them speak French and all they've had is grammar instruction? Wow, no wonder he was upset. So he decided to get even. He was going to show them up for the fools that they are. He was going to show his disdain for French culture and the French language. He would humiliate them. He came in acting French. He had a beret, okay, a fake glass of wine, and he overdid the accent. He thought he was overdid. He said, "Ah, mais oui, mes amis, je parle français avec vous. C'est très bien être ici avec vous. Comment ça va?" The teachers thought he was wonderful. They said, now you've got it. My goodness, that's amazing. What held you back? Wow. He thought he was making fun of them. He thought, and that's how the accent, he could never do that with a French speaker. Peter Ustinov tells this wonderful story. I don't know if you've ever seen Peter Ustinov in a movie. Go see Top Copy. It's a masterpiece.
Okay, I'm going to skip that. There.
To yourself and make sure for a couple of words, crucial ones, you pronounce that final consonant. Don't do it all the time. It's like a Band-Aid and it'll get you through that one obstacle, that one conversation. So used occasionally can help you out, but it's not something you have to do all the time. That was a great question. Thank you for pretending that you asked it.
Thank you for informing us. Going back to explicit instruction though, and I teach a course in psycholinguistics and language acquisition. In our master's program, we have a master's program at the Universidad Católica. And there's in that course, when I talk about explicit instruction, we talk a lot about, for example, Professor Van Patten's book, we use that a lot. And I relate it to kind of like Linus from Charlie Brown, you know, who had that security blanket. You know, it also has an affective function. You know, Linus feels safe with that blanket. He says, all right, I've got my blanket. It's going to protect me from the boogeyman and whatever else, you know. And so I kind of relate that in a similar way and say it's like having all of this explicit, you know, grammar. It's like you feel the learner might have this affective function, as Van Patten mentions, where the learner feels a little bit safer to a certain extent. But we know that in the long term, as far as acquisition, besides working with as part of the monitor, you know, it doesn't really serve much function. So I think that
I think that's true. And I'm hoping that 10, 20 years from now, we won't need the security blanket.
That would be amazing.
Because the problem we have now is that the popular view of language is the old view.
That's right.
Dr. Ashtari has looked at cases of kids who've taken classes in their heritage language. It makes things worse. Because all they get is grammar, grammar, grammar.
Right.
They're humiliated because they make mistakes. Rather, they needed some time with my pal Steve Kaufman. Okay, they just let it happen, etc. But
right.
People expect perfection too. That's a problem as well.
That's right.
So the public doesn't get it. If a child speaks Farsi, if a child is say 8 years old and speaks Farsi, Persian as a 5-year-old would, the aunts and uncles are going to be a little bit upset with that. So just simply the way it is, we have to adjust.
That's right. Another question that people are asking often is the role of the L1 in teaching. This notion of translanguaging, for example, that has become popular, especially in bilingual education. What is your view on the role of L1 and code switching in the classroom?
Okay, first of all, I never use the word translanguaging except now because I don't understand it. I've read 5 articles on it and it seems to vary, so I've ignored it. Instead, I'll answer an easier question. What is the role of the first language?
Sure.
If you give, this is when my colleague and I wrote a paper about Arnold. And we published it in a bilingual journal, okay, bilingual ed journal. Arnold, when he was governor, was an opponent of bilingual education.
This is Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? You guys, okay.
Yeah, you know.
Just because Arnold was so sophisticated, is in so many ways. I mean, on the ecology and environment, all these things, politics is excellent, but not on language. He had no idea. We should have talked a little more. My conversations with him on Venice Beach were sort of like, how are you today? You know, that's kind of stuff. Anyway, here's what it is. If you have a good education in your first language, you understand more. That makes the English you hear more comprehensible. The best bilingual programs start out with language arts and subject matter teaching in the first language, because incomprehensible input isn't going to help you. Arnold had high school in Austria. He was well educated in Austria in German. He always spoke in Venice Beach. He always spoke German with his pal Franco Colombo. Sergeant Shriver and all these other people spoke German to him all the time because they liked it. He never avoided it, which is really good. But he felt, oh, these people who come from Mexico, they should, you know, really try to speak more English. No. What Arnold did, by the way, very impressive. He's a very likable guy, as I've said. First thing he did, and he told all of us about this, he walked over to Santa Monica College and he enrolled in ESL classes. He took them and went on to regular English classes. So here's what we say. Do stuff in your first language. Get language arts in your first language, get subject matter. At the same time, get comprehensible input in English. And he did that combination. And being a very friendly guy, he had lots of friends. His girlfriend at the time was an English teacher. Can you imagine? His best pal was the only person who ever defeated him in a contest. Frank Zane beat him in the Mr. Universe contest. Frank Zane was a junior high school teacher. He helped Arnold with so many academic things. It was a tremendous resource.
Yeah. Good. And what you always emphasize the importance of GSSR, guided self-selected reading with Beniko Mason and such. There's a question in the YouTube if there's a difference with a different script, like with German or with Italian, sure, but Arabic, for example.
Yes, this has been on my mind for the last week. How did you know?
No, it's the Chicago connection.
Yes. In fact, Paisana, I'm going to send you a paper, a working paper on this, okay? And you may share it with others.
Great,
okay?
thank you.
And you can say, Steve Krashen's a personal friend of mine. He sent me this paper. Anyway, here we hang out. Good, I hope you do that. I've been worried about this because of my adventures in Chinese and my current now growing exposure to what is going on in the Farsi community, because Farsi, Persian, uses a version of the Arabic alphabet, which is quite a challenge, okay? I have in Hebrew, I know the Hebrew alphabet extremely well. So I can't use myself as an example because I went to Hebrew school. And the first 3 years of Hebrew school, we spent all that time drilling the alphabet. Wow, that was so boring. It's amazing I got through it, all right? We never learned to say anything. We never got any comprehensible input. But here's what I think now. Let me give you a theory, which is Frank Smith's idea. His theory of language acquisition, we're going to go inside language acquisition now. We acquire things when we understand them. And how do we understand? We understand in general when we make a prediction and it's confirmed by the real world. That's how we learn. So for example, we're predicting all day long, Frank Smith points out, and we're rarely wrong. Most of our predictions are correct, which is why we're so rarely surprised. For example, in the sentence I am now using, you know exactly what the last word is going to, okay? You didn't even need me to say that. My example, in the days when we were traveling and going to hotels all the time, I use that as an example. You check into a hotel, you know you have to check in from your previous knowledge. You know there's a desk. You know there's a guy behind the desk. You know you're going to have to show him your credit card. You get a key to the room, which is probably a plastic card, which will confuse you. Then you'll find the room.
Okay, just to save time, because I want to get to the output question and then we'll take a break. What he says there is that we're able to figure out a lot in reading because of what we already know. Like if we're reading a story, for example, about a mystery, we know that there's probably going to be a detective, there's going to be some kind of crime that needs to be solved. Like we already come to the reading or come to the language with some prior knowledge, some previous context, right? So we can bring that to help our understanding of what we're reading. That's what he says, basically, just with a lot more detail. Okay, let's listen to what he has to say about the role of output, and then we'll take a break, guys. Okay.
He makes any money on doing this, which means no one's going to do it.
I don't want to monopolize your time, but I'd like to ask you one more question that's in the chat here on the Zoom session from one of our professors from the master's program. Adeline, she also teaches for a program called Ecuador Habla Inglés, which is sponsored by the U.S. Embassy in Ecuador. So it's a really great work that they're doing. She says, could you please comment on the role of output opportunities that give students a chance to apply what they've been acquiring through understandable, compelling input? What is the role of output?
Okay, I'll give you the hardcore argument first, and then I'll soften up. There's no role for output. Nothing, nada. You don't need output to acquire a language. We have too many cases of language acquisition without output, and it can freak you out. Output before you're ready makes you really nervous. I could go through the literature, but instead I'd rather tell you one of my favorite stories, and then I'll soften all this in a moment. When my daughter, who's now 50 years old, can you imagine? When my perfect, wonderful daughter was, our daughter was 6, 7, she would go play in a neighbor's house, and with the neighbor's child, the same age, they still know each other. It's really cute. Anyway, my job would be to bring her there and then come back in a couple hours and pick up both girls and take them to my house so the mother could go to her Spanish class at Santa Monica College. So, and we were all quite close, good pals. So my neighbors said, well, I'm off to my class, just a minute. I have to go in the kitchen, I have to take my pill. So she'd go in the kitchen, get water, pop this pill. I said, what was that? She said, Valium. Those of you, it's Prozac, very similar, anxiety reducing drug. And we were good enough friends, I could ask her, I said, what are you doing with Prozac or the Valium? It's Spanish class. It freaks me out. Ever the researcher, I said, what is it about Spanish that makes you so nervous? Having to talk, being called on in class, having to give an oral report, having to talk before I'm ready is what she was really saying. That got me interested in the affective consequences of output. I did a literature search. By far, the most feared activity in class is having to speak, being called on. Terrifying. I remember as a language student, the same feeling. This is universal. Now, I'll give you a touch of the research. We have studies where one class allows delay and they do just as well or better, et cetera. But the best study I know of comes from South America. Researcher named Sorensen went to see a tribe in the Amazon Valley where there was a very funny rule. This is 10,000 people who spoke like hundreds of languages in a small area. 10,000 is not very many. You get that many at a football game, okay? And that's not good attendance. The rule of the society was you can't marry someone who speaks your language. They regard people like us as incestuous, doing disgusting things, marrying someone who speaks your language. As a result, there's a lot of multilingualism going on and a lot of language acquisition. And Sorensen studied this. He found that when children were growing up, they would get mommy's language, daddy's language, the lingua franca, the common language of the local community, and eventually more of the other languages of the whole area. Here's how they did it. They were silent for like 2 years. They didn't start speaking until it came easily. Eugene Nida wrote a similar paper about Africans getting the language of neighboring cities, neighboring things, and just listening. 2 years, 1 to 2 years is about average, where you kind of get a feel for it. So I think this is very interesting advice. The danger with encouraging talk in class is forcing output. Now, I'm saying encouraging. Allowing, that's a different story. I would never tell people, you cannot speak English in my class. I was quoted in the beginning, Gratian wants us to tape the students' mouths shut. No. If you want to say something, go ahead. That's fine. And it is warmly accepted. It's fine. But you're just not forced to do it. That's the interesting thing is if you do that, they use more of the language. Tracy Terrell had this in his Spanish classes where they could answer in English for the first 2 years. As their Spanish got better, they automatically started answering in Spanish. He didn't worry about their mistakes, didn't bother correcting them. I think that's a good attitude. So this, I think, is rational, comfortable for everyone. You're just not forced.
Great, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time so very much. I don't know if you could leave us with a last little soundbite, maybe a little little piece of advice, a little ánimo for the teachers here in Ecuador who have been so excited to listen to you.
I don't know a lot of these. The only ones I know is stay away from junk food. That works. Oh, Fernando Lamas, the actor. He said this on national TV. Okay. It's more important to look good than to feel good. I think that's very profound. Anyway, no, I don't have any words. The goal is comprehensible input. The goal is truly interesting input. Oh, let me leave you with a story. One of my favorites. It's about one of my absolute favorite people in the world. A woman that I'm crazy about. My older cousin, Evelyn.
Okay, he just tells a story about his cousin. Okay, that's it. That's the most important stuff from that talk. Well, it's available on YouTube if you ever want to watch it again, if you want to share it with your colleagues at your institutions. It's not a bad idea, especially because they can hear that it's kind of tailored around the Ecuadorian reality to a certain extent, at least in the questions that were asked. So you guys can share this. If you need me to, I will copy it once again in the chat here, the link to the video, so that you can have it and go ahead and share it. Have a reunión de área, you know, have a happy hour, or I don't know, popcorn at least, or something with your colleagues, so that it's easier to digest with a little bit of alcohol or something. Like if you're going to propose something totally revolutionary, I think a little bit of like un traguito or something like that, like makes it a little bit, have a watch party, you know, say, guys, we're all going to hook up on Zoom and we're going to watch this together. Okay. We're going to bring our snacks, make it like, you know, not like you're going to lecture them, but be like, I found this cool video, guys, let's watch it together. Yeah. Something like that to motivate them a little more. All right, sorry guys that we went so far over. Let's take a break then, just until 6:50, if you don't mind right now, 18 minutes till 6:50, so that we can, I just wanna share one quick thing about input activities, and then I'll get you guys in groups to work on your own, okay?
I do have a question, teacher. You said you were going to provide us some graded readings?
Yes, I'll do that during the break. I'll send them.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, guys. Ready to continue? It's getting a little dark in here. All right, are you guys inspired to change the world? Okay. All right. So I want to continue a little bit with Van Patten's sessions, part 3. It's 12 minutes long, so we're going to take a look at this video to follow up on the importance of input and how traditional instruction really does virtually nothing for our students. And then I'm going to just do a really quick thing about input, and I'll let you guys work in your groups on the input activity. Okay, that's what's in store for the rest of the class. So let's go.
Question we have now is, if input is so important, what does traditional practice do? What does that change the following sentences to inversion? Est-ce que vous parlez français? Parlez-vous français? What does that kind of practice do? And your answer is what? Essentially, not much. Very little, if anything. In fact, there are some people who argue much more strongly than I that say it does nothing, right? It does not help with mental representation. It is not clear that it helps with skill development, which we're going to touch on in just a minute. So if we have our practice makes perfect mindset, what we want to do is kind of go, no, not really. That's really not how language develops. Okay, we're about to go into point 3, so it's a good point for a question. Good for you.
But
there's no but.
We'd be asking students to practice so that they know what to do when you assess, and so that we can use that data to direct our instruction.
What you're saying, let me just peel that back for a minute, that there should be some relationship between what's going on in class and how things are tested. There's sort of something implied there, right? Right. So my answer to that is change your testing. Change your assessment.
Yeah. But shouldn't they at least be used to doing that format?
Yeah, so change your assessment, and then you can do in class what you need to do. Okay, so let's go on to point 3. We've got about 10 or 15 minutes left, and we should have just enough time to cover this before we take a break. Unless you don't want to take a break. Okay, communication is distinct from mental representation. Okay, let's begin with the definition. I want you to, this has to go really fast because we're running out of time here. So with somebody next to you, I want you to define communication. So answer or finish the sentence. Communication is what? I'll give you 1 minute. Go.
What is communication, guys? Put your ideas in the chat. What is communication?
Okay, who has the definition of communication? Quick, don't be shy. I'm not going to call on Ryan because he's the king. So. Okay, we have sharing ideas. What else? Conveying meaning. What else? Interaction. What else? Making yourself understood. What else? Expression. What else? Successful understanding between people. Okay, you all have bits and pieces of the technical definition of communication I want you to have. So now we're going to take your ideas and put them together in this definition. That communication is the expression, interpretation, and negotiation of meaning in a given context. Okay, so let's break this down. Let's break it down. Come on, break it down. Okay, meaning is information, propositional content, or intent. What is it that you want to say, or what is the person saying to me? Expression is your production. Interpretation is your comprehension. Context is the participants and the setting or purpose. Those are very important in communication because communication shifts and adjusts itself depending on context. And negotiation means sometimes communication is not successful. What is being expressed is not necessarily what's being interpreted by the other person. So there has to be clarification, confirmation, and co-construction of the discourse. That just means that both of them work together to make sure that they understand what they're saying. Okay. Now, how is communication context dependent? And here's where pragmatics comes in for those of you who want to know what. Okay, so here's this guy, Jake, this fictitious kid, Jake, 19-year-old at MSU campus, talking with his best friend at lunch. And Jake says, hey, here's a question only you can answer. And his friend says, shoot. We all understand what's going on there, right? Now, Jake is in a political science class now. He raises his hand. He says, Professor, he says, first he says, excuse me, because he's polite. He's been on Judge Judy and she's read him the act. So he knows to say, excuse me first. Professor, I have a question. And the professor says, go ahead, Jake. And this is with his romantic partner. They're watching a DVD at home. And Jake leans in and says, I have to ask you something. And the person says, In each and every one of these situations, Jake is performing the exact same pragmatic intent. In one context, he says, here's a question only you can answer. And excuse me, Professor, I have a question. And then in the third, I have to ask you something. Those are three very distinct ways to say, I have a question. And it changes depending on the context being the setting or the partner and the people, the physical setting and the people. Okay, why is that important? Because people have social roles, expectations, and so on. An important point to note is that although context influences how people use language to communicate, context does not influence the nature of language itself. What this means is that Spanish is always Spanish, no matter where it's spoken. French is always French, no matter where it's spoken. So let's go back to look at English, for example, and examples with Jake from the previous slide. The syntax of English will always be the syntax of English, no matter who Jake communicates with. So, for example, Jake does not switch from a subject-verb-object language to a subject-object-verb language, depending on context. English is always a subject-verb-object language. Jake does not switch from an intellectually weak English to an intellectually strong English, which would be similar to Spanish or Italian, for example, depending on context. English is always going to be intellectually weak. And Jake does not switch from English's 11 vowels to only 5 vowels, depending on context. The English vowel system is the English vowel system, no matter what context Jake is speaking in, or any of us are speaking in. So the point here is that mental representation does not change because of context. So communication then makes use of mental representation during language use. The question for us becomes, how does this communication develop? How does it evolve over time? There's a fundamental principle here, which is this, that communication develops only through acts of communication. What I mean by this is that learners learn to communicate by engaging in contextualized acts of, remember our definition, expression, interpretation, and negotiation of meaning in given contexts.
This is very similar to what Dr. Krashen said, that we acquire language by understanding it. We acquire language by processing the meaning of it, not by looking at verb formulas, right? But we acquire language by interpreting messages, by being able to understand them. See, this is similar. He echoes the same sentiment. These two guys get along really well. They think alike.
Communication does not develop because of practice with language. You don't sit there and practice communication. Communication develops because you're communicating. In other words, what you have to engage in is what psychologists call transfer appropriate behavior. If you want to gain skill in something, if you want to learn how to do something, you have to, from the very beginning, engage in that behavior that you want to get skill in. You can't do something that's not like that and think that that skill, that what you're learning is going to transfer to the skill that you want to develop. No, the skill has to be transfer appropriate all the way along the line. What's important for teachers to note and instructors of languages is that classrooms are fixed contexts of communication. They're fixed. This is very important. What this means is that the setting is always the same. You're always in a classroom. It's always the same chairs, the same windows, it's the same 4 walls. The setting does not change. And more importantly, or just as important, I should say, is that the participants are always the same. It's always the students and a teacher. In other words, the classroom is not a bank, and the participants are not a bank teller and somebody who wants a transaction. The setting is not a doctor's office in which the participants are a doctor, a patient, and a nurse. Classrooms are classrooms with fixed setting and fixed participants. Role-playing and acting are often used by language teachers. And I think what I want to impress upon people here is that role-play and acting do not obviate the constraints on the classroom context. Role play and acting are not communicative in the senses used here. If we think of communication as expression, interpretation, and negotiation of meaning in a given context, and the context is fixed in the classroom with students and teachers, that means the communication has to be between students and teachers. You cannot role play and be a doctor and a patient because you aren't. And you aren't negotiating, interpreting, or expressing real meaning. You're play acting. Those might be useful activities to do for other reasons. They might be fun, they might be engaging, but we don't want to say that those can substitute for actual communicative activities as we've defined communication in the current context. An interesting thing from research is that the language that grows in your head, what we call mental representation, may grow during communicative interactions. Now, why is that? Why would your mental representation grow if communication involves processes different from that? Well, that's because part of your interactions, part of your communicative interactions include interpretation of meaning. And there should be a clue there to you, a hint of why mental representation might grow. That's because interpretation of meaning implies that you're being exposed to input as a learner. And if you're being exposed to input, that's input that you're interpreting for its meaning. So therefore, communicative interchanges contain input that might be useful to the learner that helps the language system grow over time. Now, let's wrap up here and think about some of the things we've talked about in these first three sections of our route through second language acquisition. The first point we try to make is that learners create an abstract mental representation of language, similar to the way in which first language learners do. In other words, what we're saying is that L1 and L2 acquisition have a lot of similarity. Even though we know they might not be exactly the same, they have a lot of similarity. And one place in which they're similar is that both sets of learners, L1 learners and L2 learners, have to create an abstract mental representation. This representation bears little to no resemblance to what is traditionally taught in practice. In other words, textbook rules aren't what winds up in your head. And paradigms and the kinds of things that you practice in typical language classes just aren't part of this representation. This representation builds up over time due to consistent and constant exposure to input data. That is, you've got to get immersed in a language for your representation to build up. No way around that. Importantly here, practice, as it is traditionally conceived and traditionally talked about, does little to foster the development of this presentation, or this representation. So in other words, practice might engage you in language-like behaviors and some language-like knowledge, but practice, as traditionally conceived, does not get you language as we talk about it here. Another point we've made in this first section is that communication is about language use. And by what language we mean by language use is that we're talking about the expression, interpretation, and negotiation of meaning. At the same time, communication is context dependent. So how you express meaning, how you interpret meaning, and how you engage in some kind of negotiation of meaning is all dependent upon the context in which that communication is happening. As we saw from the examples of Jake with the way he asks questions in the classroom. Now, communication assumes some kind of underlying representation. You can't communicate out of thin air. So presumably you have something in your head that you tap during your communication. And finally, communication develops only by engaging in communication. You can't really practice communication in the traditional sense. So in other words, just like mental representation evolves over time based on your exposure to input, communication evolves and develops over time because you've been engaged in communication. Our final point in this wrap-up is a question for you. Sitting back and looking at what we talked about in terms of mental representation, being distinct from communication, the nature of communication, and the fact that there are severe limits on what practice does for language learners, that is, at least traditional practice. The question becomes, what implications are there for language teaching so far? That's a question I'm going to leave for you to think about.
Okay. Right. So we've already talked about some of the implications for language teaching of what we know from language acquisition. The only problem is, again, we have a lot of opposition. That's really hard to deal with. Super hard to deal with when we have to deal with administrativos and all those people who don't know about language teaching. But again, my proposal to you guys is to educate them, to start educating them, try to get them to understand how we teach differently. Yeah. Because otherwise we're not going to get anywhere, really. Okay, any questions on the things that we've looked at so far? Like in Van Patten's talk or anything? Comments? Okay. I sent you guys in the chat during the break Lo prometido es deuda. I sent you the links, yeah, to the different pages, 2 different libraries. You guys can navigate those on your own, play with them. You know, you don't need necessarily a tutorial, just see what they all have, what kinds of materials they have, and those are free and open access. So you're welcome to use those, as well as the modules. Tomorrow we'll take a look at the modules. I'm going to have to steal someone's screen, those of you who are in Ecuador, because I can't access them from my computer in the US. So I'm going to steal someone's screen so that I can show you around the modules page, and you'll see why the modules are the way that they are. Those of you in the public school system who already know them, you'll understand a lot better why they are the way that they are now. And those of you who are in the private school system or are teaching freelance, you're welcome to use that material. It's open access. It's public domain. It's free for everybody. Legally, it's free for everybody. So you're welcome to use pages of those modules or whatever you think might help in your teaching. So we'll take a look at those tomorrow, okay? Okay, all right, let me send them again. Sorry, those of you who left during break. I'll send the links again. These are digital libraries, right, with simple reading, so you guys can look around and play with them. I'll send them to everybody, even though one of you sent me a message. I'll send them again to everybody. There's one of them. Go ahead and open them on your computer, save them so that you have them, because I'm not going to send them again. I'll send them again, but it'll cost you $5. I'm just kidding. Okay, I'm just kidding, guys, por si acaso. Okay, all right, really quickly, 5 minutes before we split into groups, I want to take a look at something briefly. I'm going to see how well you guys really understand this topic. Okay, going back to structured input activities. Remember yesterday we talked about creating structured input activities, right? All the guidelines we use to create them, the types of activities, binary options, ordering and ranking, selecting alternatives, supplying information, surveys, et cetera, et cetera. Remember all that yesterday? Okay. Right now, I'm going to present to you some really bad structured input activities. Your job is to tell me why they're bad. Okay? Tell me what's wrong with them. Got it? Comprender? Yes? Okay. Let's go. All right, so let's say we're focusing on the target structure, the simple present, right? And the instructions say, walk around the room and find a classmate who does each of these things and write his or her name in the space. Boy, this looks kind of familiar, like an activity from yesterday. But what's wrong with this? This one is not good. Why is this one not good? Take a look. Remember the guidelines that we use to create structured input activities, and anybody who can, tell me what's wrong with this.
Maybe these exercises they are not being focused just in one function. You told us that we have to give them, for example, just working with the singulars. And here we are talking about singular as well as plural. So probably
Could be, that could be the problem. That wasn't exactly what I had in mind, but could be. I'll give you guys a clue.
Maybe that there are simple sentences and the other you marked are complex sentences, so they obviously are not going to understand the third and fourth.
Okay, remember the level of the students who are studying simple present for the first time. If I have a sentence, make sure that, and I have a subordinate clause, right? I'm using siblings, yeah? Take a look at number 4, that the teacher had given the day before. Had given, past perfect? This is the level of the language, except 1 and 2 are fine. But 3 and 4, the level of the language is way too complex for the students studying simple present for the first time. Okay, that's what's wrong with this activity. Cool. Let's take a look at another one. All right, target structure is present continuous. Look at the picture below and tell what each person is doing by filling in the blanks in the sentences with the form of the verb to be. Okay, so here we have a picture, which you're not going to see on the next slide, but you get an idea what the picture looks like. Just keep it in your mind, okay? This is the picture. Here's the activity. Tell me what's wrong with this.
It's not meaningful. It doesn't doesn't make the students to analyze the meaning. Just filling with this oral.
Is this input?
No.
No.
What is it?
It's just learning grammar. Maybe they are not conscious about that.
Really, maybe really.
It's mechanical, like you said, right? It's filling in the blanks, it's all that, and it's output. This is not input, this is output. Why? Because I'm making them produce part of the target structure. Remember that picture I showed you on the previous slide? Do you need it?
No.
The instructions said tell, and tell implies to speak.
Well, okay, but okay.
You don't need a picture because maybe one student is just gonna put is, are, and nothing else.
So I'm gonna go like this. Do I need this part of the sentence to complete this activity?
No.
Nope. They look at the subject, they say a family is, some people are, one man is, few children are, a boy is, done. They haven't processed any meaning. They haven't done anything. They haven't been able to do anything with this, right? So it's mechanical, it's output, not input. We don't need to process meaning in order to complete this activity. So how can we make this a good input activity? Taking the same premise here, right? Taking this idea, what can we make them do instead of this?
Changing the instruction with the B and filling the blanks with the action. What is the family doing? What is some people doing?
We can't have them produce the target structure though. We can't have them produce.
You could give them like binary options, just like if the family was walking or like eating ice cream or something like that. So they have to be like, oh no, they were walking. They choose one.
They can do, or they can say a family is walking, true or false? A family is walking, yes or no? Do we need the picture to do this?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we need to look at the picture to see if it's true or false. A family is walking. Okay, so we have a family walking right here, a family walking right here, right? Some people are playing volleyball. Then I have to look back at the picture. Some people, are they playing volleyball? Yes, okay, they are playing volleyball. Yes, that's true. One man is swimming. But I need to provide them with the target structure so they can see it used well, used in context and used well, used grammatically correctly. Does that make sense, right? So I can have them respond true, false, yes, no. But I can't have them producing part of the target structure. You see? Okay. So we understand what's wrong with this. This is horrible, 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 horrible. Next activity, last activity. What's wrong with this one? So this is a vocabulary activity. Target structure is vocabulary with professions. The instructions say, look at the pictures and match the profession with the item the person most likely uses. So we have the professions on the left and the items on the right. Yes, I know there are 8 professions and 6 items. That's not the problem. I just didn't have space to put more. I just left it like that, okay? It's not about how many. What's wrong with this activity? It's matching, right? We can do matching.
What question? Was it necessary to put names to the items?
No. Because our target structure is professions, right? We want them to learn professions vocabulary.
Maybe they don't know how to say the items. They just, it is features that they are going to match.
You're already giving
I mean,
the answers?
How?
Because, for example, here the fireman is already like handling this thing. I don't know the name was, I'm sorry. The hairdresser has the dryer and the other thing as well. The musicians have the guitar. So you just have to look at the picture, but you don't have to understand the function, or I mean, you don't have to understand the profession too much. Just see the picture.
Exactly, which means that we don't have to process meaning. You see what I'm doing right now? All I do is I'm looking at the different items that the people have. Oh, look at the postman. He has this thing, and there's one right here. I don't need to process. If I take this stuff out that I have right here, if I take all this stuff out, can they still do this activity?
Yes.
Yes.
That means that they're not processing. They don't need to process the meaning of these vocabulary words to do this activity. They just match pictures. How do I make this better? How can I work with an activity like matching with vocabulary, but making them process the meaning? How do I do that?
Maybe providing pictures with the places where they work.
How is that different? That's not really different. What do I have to get rid of? I have to get rid of something. What do I have to get rid of?
Can we erase the picture of the astronaut, the fireman, so they only have the word and they have to match with the correct object?
Good job, Valentina. Yes. Goodbye. Get rid of these pictures. And that way, they really have to understand, they have to rely on the meaning of the English words to match them with the pictures, right? So we get rid of these pictures and just leave the English words. Let me tell you about an experience that I had while I was working with the team of the modules. Oh my God. So I had a teacher, I think it was the one for segundo de básica, but I don't remember, but it was from elemental, okay? And they were teaching, let me mute all of you guys. And they were teaching they were teaching colors, okay? And so they said in their activity, they had a matching activity like this, where they had 2 columns. But when we wrote the modules, we had to write them in Microsoft Word and then send them to the diagrammers that had instructions of how to put it together on the page, right? So she wrote in there, please put 2 columns, right? She said in the left column have like manchas like the tinta, right? So basically the left column looked, hold on, let me illustrate this for you. What she wanted was that the left column looked like this. So here's like a manchita from red, and here's another manchita, right? Like this, and then maybe another, like, etc. with all the colors, okay? Just the mantas, right? And then on the right side, she said, please use pictures of fruits. So she said a picture of, for example, an apple. If I can't draw in real life, I really can't draw with Zoom, so forgive me, guys. A picture of a banana, yeah, and a picture of, let's say, something like grapes, right? And the whole activity had more items, but I'm just making it small so you don't have to suffer through my drawings, right? And these are grapes. Sorry, I just can't. Grapes. Okay, what is the problem with this activity?
There is the answer.
Have to see the color and match.
Where is the English? They're matching pictures with pictures. Where is the English? Where is the English language? There's no English language here. They have a mancha of a color, and then they have a picture of a fruit. There's absolutely no language here. It's just matching colors and colors. You see? So yeah.
So we have to avoid this kind of activities where we provide 2 different photographs or pictures.
Well, yeah, because you have to make sure that you're actually using English. So in order to make this doable as an activity, what I would have to do is take away these manchas and just write red, Write the color yellow, not with the color, no, just the word, right? So that I'm sure that my students are processing the meaning of the English words, and then I can have them match it with the pictures of fruits. But I know that they're processing the meaning of the English words without the manchas. There can't be little that, because they're not going to rely on processing the meaning. Remember, we always have to make sure they're processing meaning. Okay. So yeah, that was really bad. Okay. Questions? Ready to work in groups? This should not take you longer than half an hour. You have until 8, but you should not take longer than half an hour. Let me show you where you're going to upload this on the platform first, please. I made a space for it on the platform here. So if you go under the week that we're under, which is week 4, you can see right here on the platform, all of the PowerPoint presentations are uploaded for you, so you can look at the examples if you want. Right here, structured input activity. Okay. All you guys need to do is upload one document per group with all your names on it. Okay, what do I want you to do? I want you to create a structured input activity on some grammar structure. I don't care which one. You guys choose any grammar structure you want. Present perfect continuous, past perfect, second conditional, whatever you want. Do not copy my activities, please, because I'm going to notice right away if you just took my activity and changed the verb form. Don't do that, okay? Come up with your own, but you can use those as like models to get you thinking, okay? You choose the grammar structure you want. You tell me what age the activity is for, and you create 8 to 10 items in that activity. 8 to 10 questions, right? Items, okay? Not 8 to 10 activities, just one activity, one, with 8 to 10 items in that activity. You have to write your instructions, right? So you have to tell the students what to do. Here's a hint. Your instruction should have 2 sentences. The first sentence should be setting the context for students, right? So if I'm going to teach, for example, the simple past through an input activity, I can say, for example, last weekend, I had a very busy weekend. Decide if the following sentences are true or false based on what you know about me, for example, yeah? Or in the hypothetical situation, like we all have certain wishes and desires, you know, or we all have certain, I don't know, something like that. Choose the, you know, the option from each of the questions, choose the option that you would most likely blah, 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 right? So set the context for them from the beginning, from the instructions. And then the second sentence tells them what to do, okay? And you develop between 8 and 10 items in that activity. Okay, choose a target structure, choose an age group, and choose the type of activity that you think would work well with that target structure. Not vocabulary, please, grammar. Got it? I will be visiting you. I'm not going to abandon you. So if you have a question or need some help, then I'll be happy to help you, okay? Let me separate you into breakout rooms. I'm going to randomly assign you once again to your breakout rooms. And there we go. Okay, and I'll be by to visit you guys. So go ahead and get started. Yeah.
pequeñas de cuarto de básica.
Yo he trabajado con todos esos rangos.
Yo solo he trabajado con pequeñitas.
Hagámosle con niños, entonces. Ponle ahí
Niños
unos-
hagamos para ver cómo nos sale.
Maybe as you guys think. What do you guys think better? Secondary or primary school?
It's just a short form, so I guess in the primary school they learn that.
All right.
And we can give more examples for kids.
So would be what age? 8 years old.
Yeah.
No me llega.
No te llega.
Capaz tiene restricción de lo de la universidad. Hay que trabajar con el correo de la PUSE.
Mándame el correo de la U.
Ready?
Entonces,
Ya te mandé y revisas si es que ya te digo.
Hi.
Hi, Janine.
Emilia, how's your boyfriend doing?
He's better, thanks.
Oh, good. That's good.
Yes, thank you, Janine. Okay, so what age do you want to work with?
Studies exist.
Yes, I'm also says 18, which is continuous, you know.
Yeah.
Mhm. So we can add some images like true, false.
Adjectives. The instruction.
Claro,
Pero sí.
entonces tenemos que poner
Give me the instruction.
But
a Janine.
we have to decide the level first.
Instruction.
I think
First
this
level. Let me
Este es comparative.
level.
A2 or
Comparative
B1.
could be B1 or A2.
No, it's not B1. A2, I think. A2.
Yes. So, yes.
A2. I'm sorry.
A2.
Otra vez. A2. Instruction.
And instructions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to
Instruction.
here. In the first part, the context, and in the second paragraph, the instruction. Present.
So
So
that would be like the context, like tell like if you're gonna use this, kind of like the setup of the story, and later on start like developing like the items. So
And talking about the types,
talking about
the types of structure input activities. So let me get it. Present. Progress.
we can give them matches.
Yeah, we have the binary.
Es que they have to read the sentences and then they are gonna answer if it is true or
Porque
false.
ya decimos, I read the information about Olivia Marco and Gina. A menos que borremos eso.
Solamente then
Oh,
answer
look at the
specifically.
picture, y le borró esto, y then read the sentences, bla, bla.
No le borres porque sí tienen que leer la información de las burbujitas que tiene. Solo
No,
ahí, then,
How's it going, guys?
Fine.
You don't convince me. Your faces do not convince me. Well, Valentina, I can't really see under your mask, but the rest of you, Ramito's like, yeah, fine. The rest of you are like,
Okay, I would like you to, teacher, where did the teacher go?
Janine, please don't call me teacher.
Sorry, Janine. Okay, so look, I'm going to share the screen. Just 1 second, 1 second. So what we're trying to do is to, okay, so more or less 1 second. I want to show you. We're going to provide 5 pictures with 2 different people in the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And then based on that, they have to match the words to create true sentences based on the pictures. How close are we to correctness? No comments.
I'm reading it. I'm looking at this.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, you have 3 columns instead of just instead of 2 columns. Doesn't it become a little more complicated?
I think so.
Is it what?
I think so, yes.
So then wouldn't we want to make it a little bit more simple? Maybe we just want to match 2 columns.
All right, and that would be enough.
Mm-hmm. You can say Valentina is taller than, and then you can have them match. But the thing is that it's like you're going to end up with the same, and you need 8 to 10 items. So do you really want to do this as a matching activity when you're just going to have Valentina, Ervin, and Ramiro, Valentina, Ervin, Ramiro as matching? Do you want to do this as a matching activity? Is there one that would work better?
We're going to have more people, not just Valentina and Ervin.
Okay.
At
But
least
is there
5.
more than one possible answer when you match, though? This is another issue. Like, what if Valentina is taller than 3 people? Then you have a problem.
All right.
You see, it's more complicated for you to create this as a matching activity than to create it as a binary options activity. That's the way that I see it.
Oh, I see. I see. So binary will be better.
I think it makes more sense, honestly, to make it less complicated for you as the teacher to create it, really.
Nice. Okay,
And
so let's.
it would be, sorry. I mean, if we make it like supplying info, like we give the space for the name and it's taller than, and we put another name and they can figure out.
You can do that. You can do that, but it becomes complicated when there are several possible answers. You see, then like to imagine reviewing it in the class, right? And then you say Valentina is taller than Tomas. That's right. Anyone else? Then Ramiro. That's also right. Then Ervin. Yes, that's also. You see how it becomes like more complex.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not that you can't do it. It's just harder to do that way, I think.
So let's say we have this picture right now here, and she's Valentina, she's Ramiro. Okay. So Valentina is smaller than Ramiro. That would be the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And then next to it, true or false.
True or false. Mm-hmm.
All right, I get it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
that way there's only one right answer and it's a lot simpler to go over.
And that's input, right?
That's input.
All right.
Mhm.
All right. Okay, let's just do that then.
Thank you.
No, that would be incorrect, my friends, because we just need.
Hello, Daniel. We think we finished, but we wanted to make sure if if the activity was all right. We put here the situation, the context, and then the 8 options.
Okay. Okay. What will you do as soon as the pandemic? Okay, put these future situations in chronological order according to your preferences. Chronological order means what will happen first, second, third, fourth, fifth, right? So you're telling them basically to order these events in the order that they want to do them. What do they want to do first, want to do second, want to do third, right? There's an underlying premise there that all students will want to do all of these activities. What if some students hate the beach? Just for example, right? What if some students don't have a crush?
They'll put it at the end or no? No, right?
I mean, what if like, okay, I'm just gonna play devil's advocate here, right? I'll say that I don't have a crush, I hate partying, I don't go to concerts. What do I do with those sentences? Right? So but don't delete anything, right? Let's think of another possibility of what we can do with these sentences.
Can
What
it
if
be
we-
like from least to greatest? And if they don't like it, they are going to put 0, -1, -2, -3.
Could be something more like that.
What
Yeah.
what if we change the instruction to give them more context in order for them to I don't know, make it more polite or more entertaining, so they say, okay, I don't like to go to the beach, but maybe I will, and I put it at the end.
Okay.
Or
How
we
about
can put
yes?
disagree or disagree or agree.
Something more like that. And it doesn't need to be only binary. They could be selecting alternatives. So we can give them the options of definitely, maybe, or definitely not, for example, for each one of these activities. Definitely,
So
probably.
it would be like a survey.
Like a survey. Exactly. So you can have them have the same options for each of the sentences, right? Where they say definitely, probably, maybe. I don't know, we can have 5 different categories, for example. You guys decide. 4 different options, or I don't know. They can have an option as I don't know, right? But this way, this covers anybody who says, ugh, I never want to study a new language. I hate studying languages. Right? That way they don't have to rank all of them and tell which one they would do first, because if they're not going to want to do that, how is that real for them? That's not real for them. But if you ask them to do it as a survey, then you have a different scenario. Okay?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
So
Yeah, she's here.
The teacher is here.
Teacher.
Yeah, paren el chisme. What?
We have just almost finished. Please.
Yeah, she's here. She's here. Shh. What?
Teacher, we don't know if it's simple, if our activity is very simple, or we have to add something.
You don't need to add anything, but my question would be, will 8-year-olds understand all this vocabulary? Do they have all this vocabulary already?
Yes, they are about 5th course, maybe. No, what?
Yeah, because 8-year-olds are usually in 3rd grade. So in 2nd grade, they start learning like this type of vocabulary, and also in 3rd grade, they reinforce.
They already know like armchair, rugs, and curtains in the 2nd year?
Yeah. We teach them that. Well, is it in a private school?
Yeah.
Yes, in public we start from first. This kind of, but with a simple one.
With words like armchair, rugs, and curtains.
Maybe TV, books.
TV, books, yes,
first.
I think so. Lamps,
Second,
computer, maybe. My question is more along the lines of like, okay, Barbie house, they can understand because Barbie, they know what that is. A house, they know what that is. But my questions were more along the lines of armchair, rugs, curtains. Do they know those?
Instead of a code sign or armchair, we can write down like a PlayStation 5, for example, you know, it's more common.
Well, yeah, you already have PlayStation, but yeah.
Yeah, as well.
Or bed, for example.
We can add clothes, for example, t-shirts.
Right, something that they probably know. Armchair is usually a more advanced word. That's why I think that 8-year-olds might not know that. And I think a better option for this activity, instead of saying true, false, I think a better
yes, no.
binary yes is to say yes, no, because true, false is usually about like facts about the world and things. I think yes, no works better. Okay, when you're done, save it as a PDF, please. Raul, if you still want to meet about your final project, do you still want to meet?
Okay, before, after class?
No, I mean, we can meet now, just in the main session. Just go back to the main session. Nobody's there. And we can meet, okay?
Jenny, are you going to talk about this final project tomorrow with us? Yes, on Friday, sorry, Friday.
I don't know, do you have any particular question?
Yes, I asked you the last time and you told me that on Friday we would talk about it.
Yeah, but I mean, if you guys want to, you should have some ideas of what you want to do already. Do you have any ideas? Do you know if you want to do a paper, you want to do a video?
I wanted to do a video like, you know, like the one we were doing before, gestures or things like that.
Right, so the only requirements that I have for the video is that it be between 12 and 15 minutes long, and that it talk about basically principles that you think are really necessary for other fellow teachers to know about language acquisition. Decide what, of all the things that we've done in class, decide what things are the most important. Like what do you want to share with other teachers? You know what I mean?
All right, this is like an interview, something like that.
It can be, creativity is awesome. So however you want to construct it, whatever style you want to use, if you want to use drawings, if you want to use an interview, if you want to do it as a cartoon, if you want to do, I don't care. I don't care about any of that. I love creativity. The only thing I ask is that your target audience be other language teachers, other English teachers, so that they're aware of things that you think that they should know about language acquisition to make their teaching practices better.
Oh yeah, so then it's going to be difficult now. It's a bit hard.
Prof, with my group, we already have the video. It is just to contrast between a classic or old-fashioned class and a structural class using all the activities and specifically focusing on the input. Okay. So we are going to comment what is wrong with the old-fashioned class and why we should use the input in the class. So
okay. That would be fine from the perspective of language acquisition theory, right? Make sure that you make that your focus, basically.
Okay, bro.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the idea, Enrique. So you can do whatever you want. If you have a lot of freedom, all I want you to do is make it a video 12 to 15 minutes that is aimed towards other English teachers to give them, it's like a tutorial for them. It's like a, does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I get
what do you want to share with them? You have 12 to 15 minutes to enlighten them. You get that? Yeah. That's the idea. Do it any way you want. You can do songs, you can do a talk show, you can do, it can be creative, it can be funny, as long as I see that you're, you know, incorporating important aspects of things that we've discussed and educating others.
Yeah, sorry, and can I choose one of my classmates in here to do this activity, the final project?
What? Sorry? Yes. Can you work in groups? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, you can work in groups of 2 or 3 students or by yourselves. But you can work up to 3 in a group because it's your final. So I don't want to have lots of people in a group.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Yes, sorry. Just go ahead, Aileen and Selena.
Sorry, Enrique. When do we have to turn this in, the final project?
Monday of next week is what I was thinking, because I don't know how much time you're going to have during the week to work on it. And you're starting a new module. So I was going to give you guys the weekend, basically.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
It's negotiable, but I really don't think, like, I can't give you really past Wednesday of next week, and you're going to start a new module. So you're going to have work for that. It's going to, you know, so I don't want you to drag it out too much.
Yeah. Yes, exactly, because we have the weekend free, so we can do on weekend.
Okay. Raul, can you go back to the main session then? And I'll be there in just 2 minutes. I'm going to check the other groups and then I'll meet with you. Okay.
Okay, teacher, no problem.
Okay.
Chicos.
Entonces, solo pongámosle compare the
Compare
picture.
these two pictures to analyze if these sentences are correct or incorrect.
Okay. According to the picture.
No, pues es que es que
Week activities
Going to
by
do.
marking with the